front of the Civil War Museum in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. I'm about to go inside in a sec, but before I do, there's a really cool sculpture out front that I want you to take a look at. It's called Moment of Mercy, and it sets the tone for what we're going to experience inside, which is a telling of the story of the Civil War from all perspectives. One of the striking features of the lobby is just its wide open emptiness. It almost resembles a very esteemed southern home of sorts. And dead set in the middle here is a compass, north and south. Choose your stairwell. A house divided against itself cannot stand. I believe this government cannot endure permanently half slave and half free. Abraham Lincoln, 1858. Behind me are some amazing pre-Civil War artifacts. What we see here is an 1860 ballot box. How cool is that? And a hat case that belonged to Abraham Lincoln. Fun fact, he was 6'4", and with the hat, it gave him at least another 5-6 inches. So pretty cool. Along the wall here too, right there, is a torch from a Republican rally from the 1860 election. They would call themselves the Wide Awakes, and they would travel with lit torches throughout the countryside to raise awareness for Republican causes. Sound familiar? These are wooden slave shoes from the 1840s. They're from New Orleans, made from cypress wood. Right here next to it is a slave collar from the 1850s. Marked with the name J. Irwin, who is probably the slave's master. Amazingly, they've managed to save a lot of these artifacts. Specifically here we have a Cat 09 tails whip, a wooden handle with 6 whip attachments and a metal spur at the end. For reference, this is what that neck collar would look like when it was attached to a human being. It was fastened around their neck as a form of punishment and to hinder their movement. They wouldn't allow a slave to rest their head when lying down, and they would get caught in foliage if he ever tried to escape. Over here we have a chain and shackles from 1850 and a collar specifically. They said this is from Georgia, and it actually includes a little bit of the original lining. As you might know, the first shots were fired at Fort Sumter, South Carolina. Soon after, the war escalated. And what you're seeing behind me was the first Confederate flag, adopted in 1861.
The single shell is ready to fire, sir. Thank you, Sergeant. At exactly 4:30, we will strike the first blow for the Confederacy. Prepare to fire at my command.
In 1861, the U.S. Army had only 16,000 men spread over a huge continent. But by the time the war ended, more than 4 years later, more than 3 million men had enlisted. 1 million in the Confederate forces and 2.7 in the U.S. armies. 1861 to 1862 was a year of massive recruitment for the armed forces. Here we have a Confederate soldier, and the Confederacy actually started the war with a much smaller population, and they had to have a military draft of men who were fit for service. And one of the greatest issues facing the Confederacy, besides obviously rampant disease, was the lack of food resources, something that they were never able to solve, specifically after the North destroyed a lot of their crops and stole a lot of their livestock in the early years of the war. interesting the way it's set up. In the next room is the artillery section. And when you enter, if you go to the left, it's the Confederate, and to the right, the Union, effectively splitting them down the middle, giving them equal representation and equal time. Here we have some really cool, real Civil War artifacts. Right here, this is a coat sleeve, 1862, from Virginia. It's General George Pickett. He was wounded in the arm, and the sleeve was cut from his coat, and traces of blood can still be seen on the item. The Civil War was the first war to be photographed and documented. War photography was exhibited afterwards in New York City, and you'll often hear scholars talk about the war in two theaters. The Eastern Theater, mostly the area around DC, Richmond, and the Western Theater, which covered a much larger area west of the Appalachian Mountains and past the Mississippi. So here we have a portrait of General Pickett, famous for Pickett's Charge, which potentially lost him the Battle of Gettysburg, but we have a lock of his hair here, which is interesting. This is a Confederate general who fought in Gettysburg, and because of him, the Confederates potentially lost the battle. It is said Pickett's Charge, although was very brazen and bold, potentially turned the battle in the favor of the Union. You see a kepi that belonged to CSA Major General George Pickett, and his name will forever be linked to the fateful charge on the third day in the Battle of Gettysburg. Robert E. Lee, standing at 5'11". We have on display here a pair of his glove, or gauntlets as they're called, and what you see here are called pain bullets, and or hospital bullets, and they're lead, and they were given to patients in anticipation of pain during surgery, hence the term bite the bullet. Soon became a common expression, and these actually are pretty cool. They have teeth marks, indentations, and they were found in the ruins of a hospital near Gettysburg from 1863. Amazingly, most of the soldiers from the Civil War died of disease and infection rather than bullets and shrapnel. The massive numbers of prisoners on both sides was shocking, as well as the conditions of some of the prisons that we had here in the United States back in the 1860s. Here we can see Andersonville Prison, an artist's recreation, 35,000 prisoners of war. Also some cool stuff, some of the prisoners that fashioned stuff out of bone of some of their cellmates here. So here they have some art created by a prisoner of war. This is actually a wooden chain from 1862, and it's all carved out of one piece of wood. How cool is that? From a Confederate soldier, prisoner of war. Ripped both sides. When Sherman's army marched across Georgia in 1864, it left a path of destruction 300 miles long and 60 miles wide. The troops systematically destroyed factories, railroads, public buildings, cotton gins, bridges, warehouses, farms and homes were looted, livestock slaughtered. Here we see Robert E. Lee's Bible. As well as his hat cord. And over here, a chair from the Confederate White House in Richmond. a Lincoln life mask. This was actually made a couple weeks before he died, but it gives you an idea of what his face looked like. And amazingly enough, this flag over here is actually a funeral sash from the funeral train that carried Lincoln in 1865. This is an amazing relic right here. We have a piece of Mary Todd Lincoln's dress that she wore for the funeral of her husband, Abraham Lincoln. Copies here of the New York Tribune, New York Times, and Philadelphia Inquirer, and how they talked about Lincoln's death. Memory and meaning. It's something different for everyone. And here at the National Civil War Museum, they actually have it separated. The memory and meaning that the South took away, and that of the North. Even in the end of the exhibit, the museum, and the war, they were separate and second.
At the eternal light, the boys in gray and boys in blue unite in tribute to the heroes who fell here 75